Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished cleaning the marble floors of the grand entrance hall. The Blackstone mansion was the largest house she had ever worked in, with its towering ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. She had been working as a housekeeper for wealthy families for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of this place. At 42 years old, Maria had learned to move quietly through these grand homes, becoming nearly invisible to the families who lived there. She preferred it that way. Less attention meant fewer problems, and she desperately needed this job. Her own daughter, Sophia, was starting college in the fall, and the tuition money wouldn't pay itself. The Blackstone family was different from her previous employers. Mr. Richard Blackstone was a technology billionaire who had made his fortune creating software that changed how people worked around the world. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, alone. Maria rarely saw Mr. Blackstone during the day, as he spent most of his time in his home office or traveling for business. Emma was a mystery to Maria. The little girl was beautiful, with long dark hair and the brightest blue eyes Maria had ever seen. But Emma never spoke to anyone in the house, not even to her father. She spent most of her time in her room or wandering through the house's many corridors, always alone, always silent. The other staff members had whispered to Maria about Emma's condition. They said she was autistic, that loud noises frightened her, and that she had never spoken a word in her life. Some of the previous housekeepers had quit because they found Emma's behavior strange or difficult to understand. Maria felt differently. When she looked at Emma, she didn't see a problem child or a burden. She saw a little girl who was lost in her own world, perhaps feeling as invisible as Maria herself often felt. There was something in Emma's eyes that reminded Maria of her own daughter when Sophia was younger and struggling with shyness. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maria was dusting the bookshelves in the library when she heard a sound that made her stop. It was a soft crying, almost like a wounded animal. Following the sound, she found Emma sitting in a corner behind a large leather chair, rocking back and forth with her hands pressed tightly over her ears. Maria's heart broke at the sight. The little girl was clearly in distress, but Maria didn't know what had caused it or how to help. She set down her cleaning supplies and approached slowly, the way she might approach a frightened cat. "Hello, sweetheart," Maria said softly, keeping her distance. Emma didn't look up, but her rocking became more intense. Maria noticed that Emma was wearing noise-canceling headphones around her neck, but they weren't on her ears. Suddenly, Maria remembered something from her own childhood. Her grandmother had taught her a simple trick for calming upset children, something that had worked magic on Sophia when she was small. Maria reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out a small bottle of dish soap she used for cleaning windows. Moving slowly and deliberately, Maria sat down on the floor several feet away from Emma. She opened the bottle and, using the cap, began to blow soap bubbles into the air. The first few bubbles floated lazily across the room, catching the morning sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. Emma's rocking slowed slightly. One of her hands moved away from her ear, though she still didn't look up. Maria blew more bubbles, larger ones this time, watching as they danced in the air currents of the spacious room. Some popped against the bookshelves with tiny, almost inaudible sounds. Others floated higher toward the ornate ceiling. After several minutes, Emma finally lifted her head. Her eyes, red from crying, focused on the bubbles with intense concentration. Maria continued her gentle bubble blowing, making no sudden movements, saying nothing. She had learned from raising Sophia that sometimes the most powerful communication happened in silence. Emma slowly uncurled from her defensive position. She was still sitting, but no longer rocking. Her breathing had become more regular, and the tension in her small shoulders began to ease. When one particularly large bubble floated close to her, Emma reached out tentatively, as if to touch it. The bubble burst just before her finger made contact, but instead of startling her, this seemed to fascinate Emma even more. Maria continued the bubble show for 20 minutes, until Emma appeared completely calm. The little girl was now sitting cross-legged, watching each bubble's journey with the focus of a scientist observing an important experiment. When Maria finally capped the soap bottle, Emma looked directly at her for the first time. In that moment of eye contact, Maria felt something shift. Emma didn't smile or speak, but there was recognition there, a connection that hadn't existed before. Maria smiled gently and began to pack up her cleaning supplies. "I have to finish my work now, sweetheart," Maria said quietly. "But maybe we can make more bubbles another time." Emma didn't respond verbally, but she followed Maria with her eyes as the housekeeper left the library. For the rest of the day, Maria found herself thinking about those bright blue eyes and wondering what thoughts moved behind them. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find Emma sitting in the same corner of the library. The little girl wasn't crying this time, but she was rocking slightly and appeared agitated. When she saw Maria, Emma pointed to the cleaning cart. Maria understood immediately. She retrieved the soap bottle and began blowing bubbles again. This time, Emma watched from the beginning, her agitation melting away as the colorful spheres filled the air around them. Maria noticed that Emma's breathing seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the bubble blowing, becoming deeper and more relaxed. This became their daily ritual. Every morning around 10 o'clock, Maria would find Emma in the library, and they would share their quiet bubble time together. Maria never pressured Emma to speak or interact beyond watching. She simply provided a calm, consistent presence and the magical floating bubbles that seemed to bring Emma such peace. As the days passed, Maria began to notice small changes. Emma started arriving at the library a few minutes early, as if anticipating their time together. Sometimes she would bring one of her stuffed animals, a well-worn teddy bear that she clutched during particularly difficult days. Maria learned to read Emma's moods from subtle signs, the tension in her posture, the way she held her hands, the speed of her breathing. During their third week of bubble sessions, something remarkable happened. A particularly large bubble floated directly toward Emma, and this time, instead of just watching it pop, she gently blew on it, sending it spiraling in a new direction. The bubble danced through the air for several more seconds before finally bursting against a window. Emma looked at Maria with what might have been the beginning of a smile. It was the first time Maria had seen anything approaching joy on the child's face. Maria felt her own heart swell with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just satisfaction at helping a troubled child. It was something deeper, more personal. That afternoon, while cleaning Mr. Blackstone's office, Maria overheard him on a phone call with someone he addressed as Doctor. The conversation was clearly about Emma, and Maria couldn't help but listen. "She's been calmer lately," Mr. Blackstone was saying. "Less frequent meltdowns, better sleep. I don't know what's changed, but something definitely has. She seems less isolated, if that makes sense." Maria continued dusting, trying to appear busy while secretly feeling proud that her simple bubble ritual might be making a difference in Emma's life. She had no formal training in autism or child psychology, but her grandmother's wisdom and her own mother's instincts seemed to be exactly what Emma needed. The following week brought an unexpected challenge. Mr. Blackstone had scheduled meetings at the house, which meant strangers would be walking through the main areas where Maria and Emma usually had their bubble time. Maria worried about how Emma would handle the disruption to their routine. When 10 o'clock arrived and Emma appeared in the library as usual, she seemed more agitated than normal. The sound of unfamiliar voices echoing through the halls had clearly upset her. She was rocking more intensely, and Maria could see that she was on the edge of one of her meltdowns. Maria made a quick decision. Instead of their usual spot, she led Emma to a small alcove near the back of the library, behind a tall bookshelf that would muffle the sounds from the rest of the house. Emma followed hesitantly, clutching her teddy bear tightly. In this more secluded space, Maria began their bubble ritual. But the sounds of the business meeting kept drifting back, and Emma remained tense. Maria realized she needed to try something different. She began humming softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her as a child. The gentle melody seemed to create a protective bubble around them, separate from the chaos of the adult world outside. Emma's rocking gradually slowed, and she began to focus on the soap bubbles once again. But this time, something new happened. As Maria hummed and blew bubbles, Emma began to make a soft sound, almost like humming herself. It wasn't quite singing, but it was definitely vocalization, the first sound Maria had ever heard Emma make. Maria's heart raced with excitement, but she was careful not to change her behavior or show her surprise. She continued humming and blowing bubbles as if nothing unusual had happened. Emma's soft sounds continued, creating a gentle harmony with Maria's lullaby. When their session ended, Emma looked at Maria with an expression. Richard Blackstone stood in his home office, staring out the window at the carefully manicured gardens below. His phone call with Dr. Sarah Chun, Emma's behavioral therapist, had just ended, and her words echoed in his mind. Emma was showing remarkable improvement, she'd said. More engagement, fewer meltdowns, and something Dr. Chun called increased emotional regulation. Richard wanted to feel pure joy at this news, but instead he felt a familiar pang of guilt. As CEO of Blackstone Technologies, he spent 12 to 14 hours a day managing his company, traveling to conferences, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Meanwhile, his daughter was making breakthrough progress, and he had no idea what was causing it. 3 years had passed since Margaret's death, and Richard still felt like he was drowning in single parenthood. Margaret had been the one who truly understood Emma. She had researched autism extensively, found the best specialists, and created the structured, loving environment Emma needed. When cancer took Margaret away, Richard inherited not just a grieving daughter, but a complex care situation he felt completely unprepared to handle. He had hired the best nannies, therapists, and tutors money could buy. Emma attended a specialized school for children with autism, had weekly sessions with Dr. Chun, and lived in a house designed to minimize sensory overload. Yet despite all these advantages, Emma had continued to struggle. Her meltdowns were frequent and intense. She rarely slept through the night, and she had never spoken a single word. Now, suddenly, things were changing, and Richard couldn't take credit for any of it. That afternoon, Richard found himself finishing work earlier than usual, driven by a growing curiosity about his daughter's daily life. He realized with shame that he knew very little about what Emma did during the long hours he spent locked away in his office. The house staff gave him brief reports about her eating and sleeping, but he had no real sense of her emotional world. Walking through the mansion's grand hallways, Richard searched for Emma. He checked her bedroom, the playroom, and the main living areas, but couldn't find her anywhere. Finally, he heard soft sounds coming from the library, a room he rarely visited during the day. What he discovered there stopped him in his tracks. Emma was sitting on the floor, completely absorbed in watching soap bubbles float through the air. But more shocking than the bubbles themselves was the fact that his daughter was making sounds. Soft, melodic humming that harmonized with a voice Richard didn't immediately recognize. Peering around the corner, Richard saw Maria Santos, the housekeeper, sitting across from Emma. Maria was blowing bubbles while humming a gentle tune, and Emma was responding with her own vocalizations. The scene was so unexpected, so beautiful, that Richard found himself frozen in place, afraid to disturb whatever magic was happening. He watched as Emma reached out to touch a particularly large bubble, her movements deliberate and focused rather than the agitated rocking he was used to seeing. When the bubble popped against her finger, Emma made a sound that could only be described as delighted. It wasn't laughter, exactly, but it was definitely an expression of joy. Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had never seen his daughter so peaceful, so engaged with another person. In 3 years of expensive therapy and specialized care, no professional had achieved what this quiet housekeeper was accomplishing with nothing but soap and water. Maria's approach was completely different from anything the specialists had tried. She wasn't pushing Emma to perform or achieve specific goals. She wasn't using behavioral modification techniques or therapeutic protocols. She was simply being present, offering something beautiful and calming, and accepting Emma exactly as she was. When their session ended, Richard watched Emma reach out and briefly touch Maria's hand. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that it brought tears to Richard's eyes. Emma had never voluntarily touched any of her therapists, rarely even made eye contact with them. Yet here she was, connecting with Maria in a way that seemed effortless and genuine. Richard quietly retreated to his office, his mind racing. Who was this woman who had somehow unlocked a part of his daughter that he had never seen? He realized he knew almost nothing about Maria beyond the basic information in her employment file. She had worked for the family for only 2 months, yet she had achieved something Richard had begun to think was impossible. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Richard found Mrs. Henderson, his head housekeeper, and asked her about Maria. "Oh, Maria is wonderful," Mrs. Henderson said immediately. "She's very dedicated, never complains, always early. The other staff members love working with her." "How long has she been spending time with Emma?" Richard asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Henderson looked surprised. "Spending time with Emma? Well, I suppose they cross paths during the day, but Maria is very respectful of boundaries. She would never presume to interact with Emma beyond what's necessary for her cleaning duties." Richard realized that Maria's bubble sessions with Emma were probably not part of any official arrangement. This woman was going above and beyond her job description, offering kindness to his daughter simply because she saw a child in need. Over the next few days, Richard found himself leaving his office at different times, hoping to witness more interactions between Maria and Emma. He discovered that their bubble sessions happened every morning around 10 o'clock, always in the library, always with the same gentle patience on Maria's part. He noticed details about Maria that he had never observed before. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, but there was something different about her presence when Emma was around. Her entire demeanor became softer, more nurturing. She spoke to Emma in Spanish sometimes, her voice carrying a warmth that reminded Richard painfully of his late wife. Richard also began to notice changes in Emma beyond what Dr. Chen had mentioned. Emma was eating better, sleeping more soundly, and showing less anxiety about routine changes. She had even started following Maria around the house sometimes, staying a respectful distance behind, but clearly seeking the comfort of her presence. One morning, Richard positioned himself where he could observe their bubble session without being seen. What he witnessed that day changed everything. Emma had arrived at the library clearly agitated, rocking back and forth with her hands pressed over her ears. Richard recognized the signs of an impending meltdown, the kind that usually lasted for hours and left Emma exhausted and withdrawn. But Maria's response was extraordinary. She didn't try to rush in or force Emma to calm down. Instead, she began humming while blowing bubbles, creating a soothing atmosphere that gradually drew Emma's attention away from whatever was distressing her. As the bubbles floated through the air, Maria began telling a story in her accented English, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a simple story about a little girl who discovered that her tears could turn into bubbles that carried her worries up to the clouds. Richard watched in amazement as Emma's agitation slowly melted away. She stopped rocking, lowered her hands from her ears, and became completely absorbed in Maria's story and the dancing bubbles. When Maria finished, Emma was calm and centered, her breathing deep and regular. But what happened next took Richard's breath away. Emma looked directly at Maria and, for the first time in her life, attempted to make deliberate sounds that resembled words. They weren't clear or distinct, but they were definitely intentional communication attempts. Maria's response was perfect. She didn't get excited or make a big deal of Emma's efforts. She simply smiled and continued their bubble ritual as if Emma's attempted communication was the most natural thing in the world. Richard felt a complex mixture of emotions as he watched this scene unfold. He was overwhelmed with gratitude toward Maria, but also deeply humbled by his own failures as a father. This woman, who was being paid minimum wage to clean his house, had connected with his daughter in ways he had never managed. That afternoon, Richard made a decision that would change the course of several lives. He called his personal assistant and asked her to arrange a meeting with Maria. Not a confrontation or interrogation, but a genuine conversation about Emma and the remarkable progress she was making. He also called Dr. Chun and asked her to observe one of Maria's bubble sessions, if Maria was willing. Richard wanted professional insight into what Maria was doing right and whether it could be incorporated into Emma's formal therapy plan. But first, he needed to understand Maria herself. Who was this woman who had brought joy and peace into his daughter's world? What was her story, her background, her own dreams and struggles? Richard spent the evening researching autism therapy approaches, trying to understand what made Maria's method so effective. He read about the importance of acceptance-based interventions, sensory integration techniques, and the power of non-demanding interaction. Everything he found supported what he had observed in Maria's approach. He also found himself thinking about Margaret and what she would think of this situation. Margaret had always believed that love and acceptance were more powerful than any therapy technique, but she had also been trained in child development and had a natural understanding of Emma's needs. Maria seemed to have that same intuitive understanding, despite having no formal training. She approached Emma with the same unconditional acceptance Margaret had shown, but she had also discovered something uniquely effective in their bubble ritual. As Richard prepared for bed, he could hear Emma in her room, making the soft humming sounds that had become part of her new vocabulary. She was humming the same tune Maria sang during their sessions, and the sound filled Richard with hope he hadn't felt since Margaret's death. The morning of Richard's planned conversation with Maria arrived with an unexpected complication. Emma woke up sick with a fever, and her illness triggered one of the most severe meltdowns she had experienced in weeks. Richard found her in her bathroom, sobbing inconsolably while rocking back and forth on the cold tile floor. All the progress she had made seemed to disappear in the face of physical discomfort and the disruption to her routine. Richard knelt beside his daughter, feeling helpless as he had so many times before. Nothing he tried seemed to help. Emma couldn't tolerate being touched when she was in this state, and her cries grew more intense whenever he spoke. When Maria arrived for work and heard the commotion, she appeared in the doorway of Emma's room with her cleaning cart. But instead of the soap bottle, she carried something Richard had never seen before, a small container of bubble solution that shimmered with colors when it caught the light. "May I?" Maria asked quietly, her eyes meeting Richard's with compassion and understanding. Richard nodded, stepping back to give her space. He watched as Maria sat on the floor several feet away from Emma, just as she did in the library. But this time, when she began blowing bubbles, something magical happened. The bubbles that emerged weren't ordinary soap bubbles. They were larger, more resilient, and they reflected rainbow colors as they floated through the air. Emma's crying gradually subsided as she became captivated by these extraordinary bubbles. Some were as large as oranges, others clustered together like grapes. They moved more slowly than regular bubbles, giving Emma time to really study them, to track their gentle journey through the air. Maria began humming their special song, and slowly, incredibly, Emma began to calm down. Her breathing deepened, her rocking slowed, and eventually she looked up at Maria with eyes that were still bright with fever, but no longer filled with panic. "These are special bubbles," Maria said softly, continuing to blow the colorful spheres into the air. "My grandmother taught me to make them when I was little, for when regular bubbles weren't strong enough to carry away the biggest worries." Richard found himself sitting on the floor beside them, mesmerized by both the bubbles and Maria's gentle wisdom. He realized that this woman had been preparing for difficult moments like this, had thought ahead about what Emma might need beyond their regular routine. As the bubble session continued, Maria began telling a story about a brave little princess who was protected by magical rainbow bubbles whenever she felt sick or scared. The princess in the story had a loving father who would do anything to keep her safe, but sometimes the bubbles were the only thing powerful enough to carry away the princess's fears. Emma listened to every word, her fever-flushed face relaxed and peaceful. When Maria finished the story, Emma did something that shocked both adults. She looked directly at her father and made a sound that was unmistakably an attempt at the word "Papa." Richard felt his world shift on its axis. His daughter had just spoken to him, directly to him, for the first time in her 8 years of life. The word wasn't perfect, but it was clearly intentional communication directed at him. Maria smiled and continued blowing bubbles as if miracles happened in her presence every day. "Yes, sweetheart," she said to Emma. "That's your papa. He loves you very much." Emma reached for one of the rainbow bubbles, and this time she managed to catch it gently in her cupped hands. The bubble didn't burst immediately but sat in her palms like a small rainbow-colored balloon. She looked at it with wonder, then carefully blew it back into the air. When the bubble session ended, Emma was calm enough to take medicine and return to bed. Richard tucked her in, and She looked up at him with clear recognition, making the papa sound again before drifting off to sleep. Outside Emma's room, Richard turned to Maria, struggling to find words adequate to express what he was feeling. "I need to talk with you," he said finally. "Not about work, about Emma. About what you've been doing for her. I've been watching, and I need to understand." Maria looked surprised and slightly worried. "Have I done something wrong, Mr. Blackstone? I know I'm not supposed to spend extra time with Emma, but she seems so upset, and the bubbles help her, and I—" "No," Richard interrupted gently. "You haven't done anything wrong. You've done everything right. More right than I knew was possible. That's what I need to talk to you about." They sat in Richard's study, a room Maria had cleaned dozens of times, but never entered as a guest. The formal setting felt strange to both of them, so Richard suggested they move to the more casual family room where Emma often played. "Tell me about yourself," Richard began. "Your family, your background. I realize I know almost nothing about you beyond your work here." Maria seemed uncomfortable with the attention, but she began to share her story. She told him about growing up in a small village in Mexico, about her grandmother who had taught her the bubble recipes and songs that she now used with Emma. She spoke about coming to America as a young woman, working multiple jobs to support herself while learning English. She talked about her daughter Sophia, who was starting her second year of college, and how proud she was that Sophia was studying to become a teacher. Maria's voice filled with love when she described Sophia's dream of working with children who needed extra help, children like Emma. "I've always felt comfortable with children who are different," Maria explained. "My younger brother was born with disabilities, and I learned early that sometimes the best way to help is just to be present, to accept them exactly as they are." Richard listened, understanding gradually that Maria's approach to Emma wasn't accidental or intuitive. It was based on years of experience, on wisdom passed down through generations, and on a deep understanding of what vulnerable children need. "The bubbles," Richard said. "Where did that idea come from?" Maria smiled, and for the first time since they'd started talking, she seemed completely relaxed. "My grandmother taught me that when a child's world feels too big, too scary, you give them something small and beautiful to focus on. Bubbles are perfect because they're temporary, like feelings. They're beautiful while they last, but they don't stay forever. It teaches children that difficult moments will pass." "And the stories?" "Every child needs stories that help them make sense of their world. Emma needed stories about brave girls who face challenges, who have people who love them even when things are hard." Richard felt humbled by Maria's wisdom. Here was someone with no formal education in child development who understood his daughter's needs better than any of the expensive specialists he'd hired. "Maria," he said carefully, "I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured to say yes. I've been thinking about Emma's progress, about what you've accomplished with her, and I wonder if you might consider expanding your role here." Maria looked puzzled. "I don't understand. I'd like to offer you a position as Emma's companion. Not a nanny exactly, but someone who could spend focused time with her every day, continuing the work you've already been doing. The salary would be significantly higher than your current position, and you'd have benefits, including help with Sophia's college expenses." Maria stared at him for a long moment, and Richard worried he had offended her somehow. "You would trust me with that responsibility?" she asked finally. "I have no formal training, no certificates." "You have something better," Richard replied. "You have love, patience, and instincts that can't be taught. You've given my daughter her first word, her first voluntary interaction with me. You've brought peace to her world when nothing else could. I can't think of anyone I'd trust more." Maria was quiet for several minutes, and Richard could see her thinking through the implications. Finally, she spoke. "I would be honored to help Emma," she said, "but I have conditions." Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised by her assertiveness. "I want to continue learning," Maria said. "If I'm going to be responsible for Emma's care, I want to understand more about autism, about the best ways to help her. I want to take classes, maybe work with Dr. Chun to learn more techniques." "Of course," Richard agreed immediately. "Whatever you need. And I want Sophia to be part of this when she's home from school. She's studying special education, and she could learn from working with Emma. It might help both of them." Richard smiled, recognizing where Maria's wisdom came from. She was thinking not just about her own opportunity, about how this situation could benefit everyone involved, including his daughter. "There's one more thing," Maria continued. "I want you to be part of Emma's daily routine too. Not just at bedtime, but during the day. She needs her father, and today proved that she's ready for that connection." This request surprised Richard more than the others. Most employees tried to minimize the demands they placed on him, understanding that his time was valuable. But Maria was asking him to prioritize something more important than business. "You're right," he said. "I've been using work as an excuse to avoid the hard parts of parenting. Emma deserves better from me." They spent the next hour planning Emma's new routine, incorporating the bubble sessions, story time, and structured activities that would help her continue growing. Richard found himself genuinely excited about spending more time with his daughter, seeing her through Maria's compassionate eyes rather than focusing on her limitations. When Emma woke up from her nap, feeling better but still a bit fragile from her morning illness, she found her father and Maria sitting together in the living room, planning activities for the coming weeks. Emma approached cautiously, still holding her favorite teddy bear. "Hello, sweetheart," Maria said warmly. "How are you feeling?" Emma looked from Maria to her father, and then, in a moment that neither adult would ever forget, she climbed onto the couch between them. It was the first time she had voluntarily sought physical closeness with her father, and Richard felt tears spring to his eyes. Maria reached for her special bubble solution, and soon the air was filled with rainbow spheres while Emma hummed contentedly between the two adults who loved her most. Richard realized that this simple moment, sitting on a couch blowing bubbles with his daughter and the woman who had helped her find her voice, was worth more than any business success he had ever achieved. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dancing bubbles and Emma's peaceful face, Richard understood that his family had just grown. Maria wasn't just an employee anymore. She was the person who had shown them how to be happy together. Emma looked up at him and said, "Papa," again, this time with more confidence. Then she looked at Maria and made a new sound, her attempt at saying Maria. Both adults felt their hearts swell with joy and hope. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that Richard had never dared to imagine. His daughter was finding her voice, literally and figuratively. Maria was being given the opportunity to use her gifts in ways that would change all their lives. And Richard was learning that the most important leadership he would ever provide wasn't in a boardroom, but right here at home, helping his daughter navigate her unique and wonderful world. As they sat together in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by rainbow bubbles and the sound of Emma's gentle humming, they were already becoming the family they were meant to be. Tomorrow, he would speak with Maria. He would learn about her life, her family, her own struggles and dreams. He would find a way to show his gratitude for the gift she had given his daughter, and he would make sure that Emma's progress continued, whatever it took. Richard fell asleep that night with a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. His daughter was healing, slowly but surely, through the kindness of a remarkable woman who asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to bring a little peace into a child's troubled world. In her own small apartment across town, Maria was also preparing for bed, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. She thought about Emma's attempted words that morning, the light in the little girl's eyes, and the sense of purpose she felt every time she walked into the Blackstone mansion. She had no idea that Emma's father had been watching, that he understood the significance of what she was doing, or that he was already planning ways to ensure that their connection would continue and grow. Maria only knew that tomorrow would bring another opportunity to blow bubbles, hum gentle songs, and provide comfort to a child who had somehow found her way into Maria's heart. The stage was set for a conversation that would transform multiple lives, revealing the true power of compassion and the unexpected ways that love can change everything. On that was definitely gratitude. She didn't speak, but she reached out and briefly touched Maria's hand before walking away. The touch lasted only a second, but it felt like a breakthrough. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave work, she reflected on the profound change that had occurred in her own life since she'd started caring for Emma. Her job had transformed from simple housekeeping into something much more meaningful. She was making a real difference in a child's life, using nothing more than soap bubbles, patience, and love. Maria thought about her own daughter, Sophia, and how proud she would be if she knew what her mother was accomplishing. Sophia had always said that Maria had a special gift with children, a natural understanding of what they needed even when they couldn't express it themselves. As she walked to her car, Maria made a silent promise to continue being there for Emma, to provide the stability and calm that the little girl so desperately needed. She didn't know where this relationship might lead, but she knew it was changing both of their lives in ways that were only beginning to unfold. The Blackstone mansion stood tall against the evening sky, its many windows glowing with warm light. Somewhere inside, Emma was probably getting ready for bed, perhaps dreaming of floating bubbles and gentle melodies. And somewhere else in the house, a father was noticing positive changes in his daughter, changes he couldn't yet explain, but was grateful for nonetheless. Maria drove home with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring another day, another opportunity to bring peace to a troubled child's world through the simple magic of soap bubbles and unconditional acceptance. She had no idea that her quiet acts of kindness were already being noticed by someone who had the power to change her life forever.